Okay, perfect. Welcome back to the Locker Room Podcast, episode number 29, I believe. So we're still going strong, even amongst the lockdown here in the UK and stuff across the pond in Ireland as well. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by David Dunne, who's a performance nutritionist. I will go through some of his current and former employers, but it might take me a while, Dunny. But welcome to the podcast, mate. Thank you very much for coming on.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. I'm looking forward to today. Something slightly different for our listeners anyway. Okay, so just to introduce you briefly then, Dunny, and then we're going to revisit later on in the podcast. So currently studying a part-time PhD at Liverpool John Moores, co-founder of Hexis, your business that you're running day-to-day operationally, which we'll speak a bit more later on, involved with British Canoe and individual support around sports, boxing, cycling, and golf. I'm sure there'll be a couple to add on there. Former of Harlequins, nutritionist for Harlequins, European Ryder Cup Team and the European Tour, Team Wiggins, Bradford Bulls, obviously QPR, where I first met you in both the academy and the first team, some stuff with Oracle over in the States, some stuff in NBA, some stuff around athletics in the US, and you wanted me to say that not in Salazar's group. That was an important point. And also some stuff around in GA, St Brendan's, your local club, which is now TCG, who you play for. And at London, we mustn't forget you played under us as management and help us set up the nutritional support there. So you've done loads of things, and we'll revisit that later on. But yeah, I mean, it's a pleasure to have you on with such a wealth of experience.
No, cheers. Like I said, thanks a million for having me. Looking forward to getting in and discussing, well, I don't know, all things nutrition, GAA, sports performance. We'll wait and see.
Let's see what comes up. Perfect. And we'll go through your career in the second part. I'm just flipping it today. So I'm going to flip things around. I want to jump straight into some nutritional questions. Obviously,
Sure,
you're the expert. Let's get you on and see what your views are. So when going into a new role or working with a new team or a new individual athlete, or however you go in, at what capacity, what's your first things you're looking at? So whether you go straight in the building, what's the first thing you do and what are you looking at?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's interesting because you might get some practitioners that try go in and try make a name for themselves early and try flip everything on their head. But I'm a big believer that when you go into any organization, the first thing you've got to do is to try build trust. Odds are that the people in that organization, the players, the staff, they've all worked with another nutritionist in some capacity before, and you're now new in the door. So why should they listen to you more than they listen to the previous person? Or if you're saying something different, or if the previous person said something different, how do you just establish that trust? So the first thing I do when I go in the door, I suppose, is just, observe, try learn as much as I can from the coaches in that environment, from the players, and actually try to build some relationships up, because I suppose they need to respect me, or they need to at least trust me to then listen to some of my advice, or be able to take on what I'm trying to say. So I think initially when I go in, it would almost very much be, observe, build relationships, don't be a nuisance, just try get your hands dirty and help out where it's needed. And I suppose the majority of the time early on in roles, that's doing some of the dog work, and it's important for practitioners to do that. I think you'll know yourself, sport is always a roller coaster, and there's always highs and lows throughout a season, throughout a week, throughout a competition. So you kind of have to, or at least from my experience anyway, you need to show that, you're willing to work for them, and probably also that you're willing to sort of be vulnerable and put yourself out there, because again, I think they'll be more inclined to trust you when you present the real you, as opposed to, I'm super professional, this is what you have to do, this is this. So yeah, I would say that's probably the very first thing I do. Like I said, sort of observe, build relationships, work on establishing trust and a bit of respect.
No, perfect, Danny. Good answer. So obviously it might range depending on where you've gone into, what the support was like before, what the culture's like. But from a time frame perspective, how long do you see that lasting? And maybe give a range of different examples through your career.
Yeah, it varies, is the honest answer. And I don't think you can say for an organization that, it's going to all be done in X period of time. I think what you'll find with any organization is you'll have athletes that are early adopters, much like with, various streams of technology. Some people will buy in sooner than others, and that's okay. And what you'll often find is the people that buy in sooner kind of give you a platform to have an impact and make change, to kind of show your worth to the players that maybe didn't buy in at the start. So I think a lot of this can actually be profiled, which is quite interesting. I think some of this can, different people have different levels of autonomy. Some people are more reliant on expert support. Some people are very happy with, themselves being in charge and just dipping in and out of us when we need. But I would say it could vary from a player perspective. You could establish trust in a relationship and get on with somebody very well within one conversation. Somebody could leave that conversation and go, I really like him, he's a great guy. But for another person, it could take 2 years for them to fully buy into the process. I would say across most of my organizations, you like to think that you kind of give yourself, to really have an impact on the culture. I would say you want to try have shifted that culture within the first year, but it's, for some individuals, it could take longer. Like I said, for some individuals, it could be the end of that first conversation. You've managed to learn about their family, tell your background, hear what they want to achieve, and, understand the person as a whole. And that could be the thing that moves them on.
Perfect. And what sort of thing then for those real tough cookies, not only players, but maybe some staff who are just not receptive of what you're trying to say? What sort of things do you, because it can be a personal thing, isn't it, when you're trying to get your message across and, you're basically just getting battered away at times. What sort of strategies do you adopt then to try and maybe overcome or change their mind, or just accept that they're not going to have your advice? And how do you go on about your business?
I think, again, depending on the individual, I think the first thing I need to do is probably respect the decision that they don't feel that they need this information at this moment in time. They've probably made that decision for a reason. And, the majority of the time it will be down to a belief system that they have. So if I go in all guns blazing and just trying to tell them that they're wrong, that's going to have a negative outcome on our relationship, and it's going to have probably a negative outcome on what we're trying to achieve in the first place. So I think the first thing is probably just respect that, give them their space, and just try learn a little bit more about how they're thinking and why they're thinking the way they're thinking. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about, why they believe what they believe in terms of whatever we're trying to change. Then I can start to maybe identify some of the barriers that we need to work on over the next few months. So it could be that the intervention that we're trying to deliver, they might not believe that actually doing that is worthwhile in the first place. So actually now I need to build an intervention that's more centered around motivation and changing how they believe the consequences will be of that. Or it could be that, let's say someone's trying to lose weight and they've tried for 4 years and they've always failed, or they've always yo-yoed. So they probably might have quite, low belief in their own capabilities or low self-efficacy. So I need to get that bigger picture to see is that, they could just think I'm coming through the door and saying, oh, here we go, another nutritionist telling me that I need to drop 2 kilos. I can't do it. I've never been able to do it, and push me away. And actually I need to get to the center of what's actually going on instead of the way they're thinking.
Perfect. Some stuff we're going to revisit later on, but I think the psychology is important there, isn't it, in terms of how you go in and work with different personnel. So once you've got that stuff and you've got most of the athletes or players or staff, buying in, what's the key things for you, your first 2 or 3 things that you go in and say, right, from a principal perspective, nutritionally, this is what I want to instill, and this is where I want the players, athletes to be?
So from a principal perspective, I suppose there are some big pillars of performance nutrition, I would say, that we want to get right. I think, the high level is very much, can we improve an individual's health and can we improve an individual's performance? They're probably the 2 high level things that we go in and look at. And at the center of that, I would say we're really making sure that, one, they're avoiding deficiencies. So whether those deficiencies are from, vitamins and minerals and their micronutrient content. So we might try to establish, what is the basic amount of fruit and vegetables or antioxidants they should be aiming to consume on a weekly basis, as well as ensuring that they're getting the right type, timing, and total amount of protein. And then we would look at, I suppose, a few other blocks around it. So are they periodizing their intake, or are they matching their energy according to their output on certain days of the week? So when the training loads are higher, are they fueling appropriately? When the training loads are lower, again, are they adjusting? Outside of that, you've got your basics around hydration? Do we have some of the basic principles of hydration in place? If somebody is trying to lose weight, or do they understand and are they capable of losing weight safely, gaining weight safely, as well as getting acute recovery strategies in place, I suppose, for the appropriate times of the week. So they'd kind of be some pillars. One other pillar just not mentioned there, I suppose, is sleep, and actually starting to look at an athlete's routine around sleep, because we know nutrition is incredibly important, but sleep is, I suppose, the wonder drug. So if someone's, eating well and not sleeping well, then there's a huge opportunity missed. So making sure that my nutrition messages support what a sports scientist or another practitioner might be delivering around sleep, how I can enhance that message and improve that element of that individual's lifestyle.
Perfect. Good stuff, Danny. How do you see, obviously it's individual dependent, but how do you think that's best gone about? Do you do group sessions? Is it more individual based? Do you think stuff online, or do you just try and do a mixture of the three and hope that the message lands with as many individuals as you can?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is down to the club and the resource available. So, for example, I've been fortunate to be in some organizations where I've been in full time, every day of the week, delivering during a period of a competition or whatever it might be, in which case you can really get into the nitty gritty one-on-one. You can sit down and you can start to understand individuals' barriers and enablers, what they need to work on, how best we can attack that. Other organizations, as a practitioner, you might be in a day a week. You might even, I remember when I started off way back when in QPR, I think I started off in the academy a day a month. It becomes almost impossible to deliver on an individual basis to a squad that size at that moment in time. And you kind of have to just take what you're given to a certain extent. I think in an ideal world, it would actually be a combination of a few strands. I think there's some basic sort of education and intervention delivery, which can be done as a group. I think then that can be followed up, and I'm going to call it hybrid coaching, followed up in a hybrid coaching manner, which is, we should be delivering some of that ourselves one-to-one, but then there are other elements that can actually be delivered digitally and made a bit more scalable and continuous to allow that athlete to have a more 24/7 access to the support they need or the resources they need. So I think they're the three things that I would really look at. Would be, you would have your group, you'd have some individual level, and then you'd have some digital level. And that group level might not just be in a classroom. It might be some practical stuff. Cooking, it might be how you restructure someone's physical environment at the club, how the food is laid out, how that's done for that group on that day of the week. So there are a number of different routes that you can go down. But I think, the biggest tie is how much time you have with the organization.
Well, it links on nice to one that I'm chucking in here, because I've managed and worked with many nutritionists. From your experience, what do you think the appropriate amount of resource a group of athletes should have to a nutritionist within the week? Do you think full-time is essential?
So I think full-time is essential. I think in some sporting environments, it's essential. So for example, if you've got let's say it's a season like the NBA, where you've got 84 games in a regular season, 114 games if you're making it to the finals, and you're traveling through multiple time zones almost every other night. I think in that instance, there's a huge opportunity for an applied practitioner to be able to step in and help deliver hands-on. I think in other organizations, it kind of depends on the priority of the club. And I suppose one thing for me that took me a while to learn is that when I started off is that, in sport, nutrition isn't the most important thing. It's an element of a wider service of delivery that, and for some clubs or organizations, it might be that actually, the management is brand new and they need time to embed their culture, in which case, how much bandwidth does a player have to really get into this on a day-to-day basis every day? And it'll be less if they're trying to learn sort of new technical approaches of a new management team. So I'm going to give a fluffy answer and still say it depends on the context and the environment. I think at a senior elite level, I think it's becoming more and more essential, especially with the size of squads. If you have a size of a squad is, let's say you're an Olympic organization and you've got 5 people that are going to the Olympics, then I don't think that's essential for full time. I think a lot can be done part time. But if you're playing in the Premier League and you have a first team squad that's 35 and you have a reserve squad that's 35, and then you have an academy and you have loan players, well then I think you actually need, maybe 2 full-time nutritionists. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on the size and the scale of the project.
For sure. Do you think then, on the flip side, having someone there full time, especially from an academy standpoint, are you at risk of being over dependent on that nutritionist to make choices for you? I've seen it, where some players go, oh, can I have this? Does it create the habit of, for them to actually change and think for themselves? Can it lead down that pathway if not managed correctly?
If not managed correctly, yes, it can lead down that pathway. And it really comes down to practitioner skills. And it's interesting because some practitioners will go into an environment and feel like they need to do all of those things to demonstrate their value and to show that, I need to be here because I set up the shakes. I put these things here. I fill this. And you are right. In a lot of instances, it's not teaching somebody to fend for themselves, which in the long run is going to be more important when, they're out of an academy, they're in their own house for the first time, and they have to do the shop, they have to do everything else. So if not managed correctly, it can be a bad thing. I think it's important as well, where there needs to be a better distinguishing of, what the roles and responsibilities are of a practitioner in an academy setting versus a first team setting versus another setting. Because, for example, it might be deemed that in a first team environment that they want you to get all of this stuff set up to be done that way to conserve the mental resources of those first team players. But obviously in an academy environment, you're actually trying to teach them to fend for themselves, to learn these skills, to build these habits so that they become more self-reliant. So I just think a nutritionist probably has to go into each of those environments with a different mindset and, be very clear what their role and responsibility is. And if they're not required to do everything for that person, if the primary role is to help educate that person, motivate that person, improve the opportunity available for that person to try influence their behavior, then they need to go in with that in mind. But it's not something you're taught at university, if I'm being completely honest. Like, you go through university degrees and they just go, here is all the knowledge. So then you go into an environment and you go, well, I need to make myself look like I'm valuable. So I'll do all of this. I'll help everyone. Then the players love me because I do everything for them. But it doesn't actually have as big an impact. So I actually think there's almost this missing module anyway at university, which is, practically how you deliver across different environments and better understanding, or being better able to clarify and understand your role in a different environment, as well as better understand behavior change and how you can deliver that, and how that also varies across different environments. Because, an academy athlete and a senior athlete, you need 2 completely different hats going into both of those.
Sure. No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And I don't think that's just nutrition. I think that's with all the support services and support staff. It's not the most important service within the context of the sport. And B, I think that transition into the workplace is huge. And I think it's something within the first 2 or 3 years, people are thinking fast, and the learning curve is so steep, isn't it, in the first 2 years of the workplace?
Yeah, 100%. And it's great. It's great to get your hands dirty. Everyone has to get their hands dirty in the first few years. Like, do all the dog work. But it's still important to have that overarching, well, what am I trying to achieve here? And what, like you said, am I trying to now make somebody self-reliant on me? Because if not, then it might be, a bit of a restructuring, or a bit of a, taking a step back to better understand how you can achieve what you're aiming to achieve. And I think a big problem is that people don't actually define what they're trying to do in the first place.
Yeah.
So if you're going in somewhere and you want to change someone's behavior, you need to define what behavior you're trying to change and work backwards from that. And, you need to understand how you can evaluate that, how you can measure the impact. Because if we can't measure the impact, well, then, like I said, we're just going in and being an extra set of hands that, to a certain extent, that becomes quite aimless.
Do you think in nutrition is hard because often nutritionists will come into a job role but wouldn't have a direct line manager? Like all the nutritionists here would report into me in the academy, for example. Like I'm not a nutrition expert, and maybe my clarity to that nutritionist might not be as clear as it would be the sports scientist or the S&C coach. Do you think having someone in who would be a direct line manager, overarching the culture, the philosophy, would help a little bit?
No, I don't. I think more than anything, I think it's, across all of those, sports science, S&C, like anyone in a performance science department, probably one of the most important things is the ability to think critically. And actually, I think if you have a line manager or a performance director who can improve your ability to think critically about situations, then I think you'll be able to achieve what you need to achieve. I think that is definitely something that I've learned over the years. I've been really fortunate when I was at British Canoeing. I had the PD is a guy there called Brian Caniff, and never have I gone into so many meetings where you get asked one question and you come out and you're still thinking about it 3 days later. And for me personally, that was the best thing that sort of happened. My development was somebody not giving me answers, asking me tough questions, and allowing you to sort of figure it out or facilitate it, or work within your team. We had a great team of practitioners in that particular project, and there was a great willingness to really take that multidisciplinary approach to understand from different practitioners' point of view where they were coming from, what we're trying to achieve, what's the bigger picture. In that instance, it was what makes the boat go faster. In other sports and scenarios, it's different, but I don't think it's essential to have a nutritionist supervising a nutritionist. I think in the early years, I think it's very important for a nutritionist to have a mentor or somebody that they can lean on to help check and challenge what they're doing. And I think that kind of falls in line with sort of our internal guidelines anyway. I'm sure the same way you have a network of strength and conditioning coaches and sports scientists that you'll bounce ideas back off, I'd have the same with nutritionists. And I think actually for a young practitioner, that's probably the most important thing to get early, is establish your network, and don't be afraid to be vulnerable within that network, because we're all here to help each other at the end of the day and work towards a common goal.
For sure. No, good stuff there, Danny. Just keeping it in with the MDT team, and I know I've gone off script a little bit here. How important is it for a nutritionist to really understand the sport and understand certain individuals within the sport? I'll give you a quick example. For example, if you took a skin fold, or you did some measurements on a particular player, a winger, for example, very lean, very slim, and the advice that came out from it is I think he could put on some muscle mass, right? That would be if you just did some whatever testing you did on it. But then looking at the player's game as a winger, like his strengths lie in his pure agility, his ability to go around players, his recovery run. You want to be careful on how much muscle mass maybe that you want to put on. With those sort of examples, how important is it that the nutritionist understands the sport, but also then gets the context maybe from coaches and from other support staff before making decisions?
Yeah, it's absolutely essential. A nutritionist can't go in and pretend like they're the main expert in a sport that they've just come into, in the last 2 years. You've got coaches there that have probably been there their whole life, and the nutritionist has to glean information from them and people that have been working in that environment for a longer period of time. So a nutritionist shouldn't come in to I suppose contradict or challenge what's being done at all. I think what the nutritionist can do is come in and sense check a little bit as well. So for example, if the coach says, well, let's say their skin folds, they say, oh, I think your skin folds are too high. The nutritionist might come in and go, well, actually, in this instance, what difference does it make? 5 mils here, this person is fit to play, they're recovering well, and we're in the middle of a competitive block of congested fixtures. So should their skin folds be 5 mils lower, or should they be available to play every week, be well fueled, be able to prioritize recovery? And I think that's kind of where the balance sits. But I completely agree that the nutritionist shouldn't come in and start kicking down doors saying, well, I think this, we have to respect the domain experts from the sports side, that, they have to respect our domain expertise within, I suppose, performance and nutrition. And then it's about collaborating together, because you see it in some sports as well, where a coach will give a player a goal. You need to gain 10 kilos. You just go, this is ridiculous. Like, you're not going to gain 10 kilos in the next 6 months, but there may be a longer term plan put in place there to help aid the development and physical growth of that athlete over that period of time. So yeah, I think it's kind of, it does kind of work both ways for sure. But definitely the nutritionist has to understand and learn about the sport from the experts that were in it. And again, coming back to the canoeing example, I knew nothing about canoeing before I arrived on my first day of canoeing. And you just have to spend time with the coaches. You have to understand what they want, how they think, why they're doing what they're doing, learn from the athletes who have done this probably since they were 4 or 5. And again, that information with your domain expertise and someone helping you think a bit more critically, I think then you'll get to a pretty good place.
Comes down again to the trust, relationships, and the softer skills, isn't it? To work together to make decisions. I think they're more powerful then, as opposed to just someone making a decision on data. Dunny, quick question for you, just before we move on. What do you think about people putting in thresholds of body fat percentage, for example? So I've seen it at different organisations. Like, you need to be under 12%, for example. What's your view on that? I understand it from both sides. I understand, but yeah, what's your views on that? Is it something you would do, or would you support, or not? If not, why?
I think if you're going to set any target, there's got to be a very clear rationale, and it's got to be done on an individual basis. So you can't have a band to say, well, look, every player here needs to be below this, because different players are going to have different genetic makeups. And as a result, some might be predisposed to being leaner, some might be predisposed to carrying a little bit more fat mass. And you also don't want to create a culture that stems around, oh, well, nutrition is about my body composition. Nutrition should be about enhancing your ability to adapt to training stimuluses or deliver a big performance when it matters most. So I think in that instance, I would say it's on a player by player basis. It may be beneficial for some players who there is a clear rationale to improve their body weight and body composition. For example, a cyclist, we know things like power to weight ratio are incredibly important. And if that cyclist is carrying an excessive amount of fat mass and they need to get up the side of a mountain, well then, yeah, we need to, to improve that power to weight ratio, we need to do one of two things. We need to maintain power and lose weight and actually, improve their body composition, or it could be that we look to maintain the same weight and improve power, in which case we're going to need to build some new muscle. So I think it depends on the context. The one thing I would say is it really depends on understanding the sport as well. So for example, we had a scenario last year with one of the rugby clubs where, we had a player who's, coming towards the end of their career. And again, should they have to, drop 5 mils during this preseason, or is the most important thing, during the preseason that they just tolerate the load? Like, preseason's about getting your body ready for the season ahead and completing the planned training sessions.
Yeah.
So in that player's instance, the goal was, no body composition goal. Can we get through planned training? Can you stay ballpark where you are? If you go up 5-10 mils, but you're fit to play and you're completing all the planned training sessions, well, you're more robust and ready for the season. Yes. Us sending you into a deficit unnecessarily for the sake of vanity is, it doesn't help with the performance outcome in that instance, which, really is having this person available and fit to play.
Perfect, Danny. I could move on and probe a bit more, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Perfect. All right, moving on then. What I've heard from many nutritionists, and like I'm not saying the message is wrong at all, but what a big part of the message is around protein consumption and increasing protein consumption, or changing the timing or whatever. But protein seems to be a big message from a lot of nutritionists that I've worked with, or who have worked with me. Do you think this is essential? Is this something that is needed, like, I say worldwide, generalizing, but amongst the athletic population, is it something that is undercooked? And B, is it taken away from other messages and key areas that nutritionists could be giving info to?
So protein is essential for athletes, and higher dietary protein requirements are essential for them to protect, maintain, even enhance their lean mass. So, in terms of, what we deliver, it's a cornerstone of what we're trying to get right in an athlete's diet. And for, when you're saying increase, I think, some athletes may need to increase within a certain range. So that could be, up to, generally approximately 2 grams per kilogram of body weight is a good target for most athletes. People could be more specific and start working off lean mass, or say between 1.6 and 2, or 2 to 2.5, depending on the scenario. But ultimately, if an athlete is not consuming protein in and around that range, then fundamentally we should be aiming to increase it. We know what impacts it can have on their recovery. What we don't want an athlete doing is training really hard and under recovering because of an inadequate protein intake, and actually that potentially leading to a loss of lean mass and function, when we know that sport is won and lost mostly based on bouts of high intensity activity, the ability to produce force quickly, move quickly, periods of explosive strength where you can knock someone off the ball and win a challenge. And we require a certain amount of mass to do that. And obviously from a strength and conditioning coach's perspective, they're training people to be stronger and more explosive, and protein is going to help facilitate those training adaptations and feed those adaptations. So I don't think it should ever be underestimated. I think, if an athlete is consuming enough protein, I don't think they need to consume more. So, there's plenty of research to show there's no real benefit to consuming, too much higher. Even people consuming 3 grams per kilo or higher, that's, there's no added benefit there. Those calories will be better served going towards carbohydrate to fuel high intensity performance, some micronutrients, maybe some fat for that person as well. Some good quality sources of fat looking to dampen inflammation. And in terms of overall message, I would view it as a pillar, but I wouldn't view it as the only pillar. Like we said at the start, there might be stuff around dietary periodization and consuming enough energy at the right time, or I suppose as Dr. Sam Impey's paper put it, fuel for the work required. Are we getting that right? Are we getting avoiding deficiencies with enough micronutrients? What's their hydration status like? How are they recovering? Are the good practices in place? So I think a lot of nutrition could probably be boiled down to the 3 T's anyway. Are you getting the right type of food at the right time and the right total amount? And that applies generally across most macronutrients and for most energy requirements. And protein is just one of those.
Perfect. Moving on then, Danny, to supplements. Supplements, topical areas, and different ones come in and out of fashion, I guess. What's your current views on supplements as a whole, in terms of your philosophy on a whole? Because I know there's different philosophies in different practitioners, but what ones then would you prioritize? For what reasons? I know you spoke about the micronutrients and the multivits and stuff, and why, and just some common ones that you might use across the board.
Sure. So, my overall philosophy on supplements is like we generally prioritize optimizing the diet. So if we can get this, those sources of nutrients from the diet, we'll prioritize that. In some instances we can't, whether that's because of we're traveling to a foreign country where we're unsure on food availability, or it's because of a dietary restriction, or it's simply something that we just can't get enough of from the diet, then we'll look to include supplements. So there is definitely a place for supplements in an athlete's diet. They do need to be viewed like as a supplement. They are additive. They're not there to replace. We should still be prioritizing this food first approach. Some things that I would generally lean on, especially at this time of year, we would always look towards vitamin D. So consuming, a low non-toxic dose of vitamin D on a daily basis. It's a fat-soluble vitamin, so we'll generally consume it with a meal. We can't get enough from food. We generally get it from the sun. Obviously, during these winter months, we're not going to be getting the same sun exposure at the right latitudes, and most of us are going to be wearing long-sleeved clothes or full-leg clothes, so we're not actually going to be able to synthesize it in our skin. So supplementing is a good idea. Most people, me personally, I'll take about 2,000 IU a day during the winter months. Really just looking at my immune function and trying to help to support that. outside of that, outside of vitamin D, I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve with an athlete. Some people may find consuming an omega-3 supplement beneficial if they can't get enough from their diet, if they don't like oily fish. Some people consume plenty of oily fish, in which case would say, well, you should be fine on this. There may be sort of targeted strategies of recovery where we might look to potentially increase that, whether it's, you know, post-operation or something like that as well. But outside of that, I suppose some of the biggest supplements that I would lean on personally for performance-related reasons would be things like creatine. There may be a time for an athlete, you know, throughout the course of the season, maybe throughout the whole season, that creatine may be beneficial. We know there's also plenty of research now, or at least some research and more emerging research on the benefits of creatine. And I suppose for people who have suffered a sort of a mild traumatic brain injury like concussion, and how it might be able to help improve brain energetics during that recovery phase, and energy availability to the brain. And then things like beta-alanine would be another supplement that I would lean on. So beta would be something generally that I would look at for, well, depending on the sports that I work in, but, you know, high intensity sports where we are trying to improve somebody's tolerance to, it might be repeated sprint activities. It might just be a threshold, you know, how high can they hold that level of performance or that level of intensity. Something I use personally, probably both of those when it comes to Gaelic football. Anyway, I think they can be quite beneficial depending on that player. For me personally, I would say, you know, you look at a sport like Gaelic and you go, it's involved in a huge amount of high intensity intermittent running, you know, over a relatively short period of time in comparison to things like soccer. So beta definitely has a place, just important to recognize that it needs a loading period. And, you know, that can be 4 to 10 weeks in some instances. So actually preparing for a championship season, you might need to think about that a few weeks in advance. And, you know, same with creatine. If, you know, I think there's a big benefit there for GAA players, but again, depends on how that GAA player likes to play their game, depends on their role on the pitch, depends on their physical attributes as well.
Perfect. Just going back to the other question around protein, do you think some nutritionists, you don't have to answer this and throw people under the bus, do you think some nutritionists would go more to a supplement-based approach first and get kind of carried away with extra supplements before securing the foundations of like you said, good food, or not?
I think in some instances, if a nutritionist is coming into a let's say a high profile environment and they need results from this person quickly, they may identify that actually as part of a recovery snack, this person is not currently consuming a recovery snack. Their main meals are okay. And by increasing protein in this recovery snack phase, we might hit the overall target requirement for protein, and a supplement may be better suited there. I don't know if, I suppose certainly within my network, I'd be very confident that the practitioners are putting food first and making sure that the athletes are getting source of protein at breakfast, some at lunch, some at dinner, maybe before bed, depending on their requirements. They have an acute recovery snack in there. And then all of a sudden we've ticked that sort of 4 or 5 servings of protein throughout the day. As part of that, some practitioners may use something like a whey protein shake, because it may fit the requirement of that acute recovery strategy. But I would like to think that no one is saying, oh, just go in and if you don't have any protein at breakfast, just have a shake. And then if you don't have any protein before bed, just have a shake. I would like to think that people are looking for, you know, okay, we'll have some eggs at breakfast. We'll have some Greek yogurt before bed because it's going to supply a nice slow release of amino acids throughout the evening. I would like to think people are taking that approach. And I would certainly say that, you know, my friends and colleagues would be leaning towards that direction, but I can't speak for everyone.
Sure, for sure. Just, and Dunny, just before we move on to the last one, I think because you mentioned some great supplements there and the benefits of them for different sports, in particular Gaelic football, who a lot of our listeners come from. It's important though that coaches don't listen to this and just start giving all their athletes those supplements. There's a lot of reading to do about it. You need to go and get expert advice around, you know, to players, like you said, loading phases, amounts, if it fits that individual, etc.
Yeah, 100%. Nobody should go in and go, well, look, I heard this in a podcast, so right, I'm going to order a crate of this, and we're going to give everyone, whatever I Googled. So yeah, you always seek professional advice on this. And there's some phenomenal nutritionists back in Ireland working across the different GAA organizations, and I'm sure they're more than willing, if they haven't already, to share that information. Again, same with myself, people can always reach out. We can share that, relatively straightforward, and also important to highlight sort of supplement safety, that, a lot of the athletes in the GAA are subject to drug testing, and as a result, the supplements they do consume do require a certain level of rigor when it comes to batch testing. Mm-hmm. So we'll always make sure that supplements are sourced that fit a certain requirement. So they might have to be improved by the LGC lab or Informed Sport. It could be also NSF certified for sport or on the Cologne list as well. So there are a number of certified bodies where we would make sure that a supplement is registered with that. But even then, that's a risk minimization program. There's no guarantee that anything is going to be drug-free just because it fell under that program. So again, you need generally a really good rationale to include these things. And if you do have a really good rationale, you need to know how to do it, as well as sort of where to source it from.
No, really good words, Dunny, and I'm sure that will land with a lot of coaches out there. Okay, just the last question before we wrap up part A, and then we'll move on to a bit more of present day and career stuff for you. A little bit of fun. Biggest nutritional myths, and I say myths, it might not be myths, but things that you've heard from players or athletes, you don't have to name any names, of course, that they believe in, that you've had to maybe try to steer them away from, or things that just come to your head. Yeah.
Carbs make you fat is probably the worst one. I think you get a lot of athletes that can be carbophobic, and actually we know that when it comes to operating at a high intensity, carbohydrates are king. They will help limit fatigue. They will help us, operate, when we need bouts of, repeated sprints. We look at most games, like we said, won and lost based on the ability to move quickly when everyone else is fatigued, in the 90th minute, in the 70th minute, in the 80th minute if it's rugby. So yeah, I think that would be one of the biggest myths, and people just need to understand, that body fat is more a function of, excess calories. And actually, if you periodize your intake well of carbohydrate, and you adjust day by day and meal by meal, in line with your energy demands and your fuel demands, then you should be fueling properly for competition, as well as tapering down to focus on adaptation and body composition at other times during the week. But a chronic low carb approach is a useless approach for most athletes.
Sure, and I've had a bit of back and forth with Professor Tim Noakes on Twitter, but I guess messages.
Did you go at him? Did you?
I've a couple of years ago, I've tried to tone it down, Dunny, because I think if I keep going the way I do, then something might come to bite me at some point. But I think messages like that don't help, do they? I mean, there's obviously there's benefits of that diet in certain individuals, especially around type 2 diabetes. But I mean, when they start venturing into the sporting world and saying, listen, you can switch all your energy reserve over to fats and you don't need carbohydrates, some athletes and players will jump on that bandwagon and believe that.
Yeah, and I think it's important then for the club, their sports science and medicine team, to have somebody in place or have a process in place to be able to deal with those sort of scenarios and situations, to have an expert or bring in an expert to clarify those myths. Because you're right, you can't extrapolate that across to a sporting context. We know that it is more efficient, to use carbohydrate at higher intensities. We can produce energy more efficiently to actually deliver those big performances than we can, from fat in the same period of time. So it's yeah, I think it doesn't help. It adds fuel to the fire, but it's like any walk of life. Somebody says X, somebody says you're wrong, and then people sit on extremes and other sides of the fence. I think the biggest value probably comes in just being, we'll never be able to read everything. No one will ever be able to understand everything, but just trying to be as informed as you can will definitely help. And just because somebody has a blue tick, don't take their word as gospel. Probably one of the biggest points to get across.
For sure, I'm sure that will get across nicely. Okay, Danny, just before we go into section 2 or part B of this, just want to quickly have a quick word from our sponsors, or from Kieran, talking about our sponsors, Rip.app, who we're very, very pleased to have on board. So yeah, here's a quick word from Kieran.
This episode is sponsored by Ripped, who have come on board with us. Ripped is a platform that connects coaches with their clients and athletes. Using Ripped, coaches can create individualized training programs and monitor their clients' progress via the Ripped app at www.ripped.app, where they can track exercise, training loads, and very importantly, well-being data. Ripped is used by high-performance teams such as Swim Ireland and Kerry GA, and also by gyms and online coaches to manage their clients. We're using it ourselves for the new DSS online training service, where you can have your own personal trainer and S&C coach to help you get fit and ready for the season, or just lose weight and get fit. We have a special offer for coaches over on our website, where you can get 2 months free access to Ripped. Just head over to our podcast page on dailysportscience.com/pod, and you'll find a link to sign up for that 2 months free access. If you'd like some more information on Ripped as a service, just go to www.ripped.app to read more there. Thanks again, guys, for your support.
Okay, brilliant. So welcome back, section 2. David Dunne here. We spoke a lot about nutrition and Dunne's philosophy and different points in the first section. Now we're going to revert back to a little bit around your career, Dunne, and currently what you're doing now. I forgot to mention, actually, the title is Nutrition in the Modern Era. And I put that in there because I think you're doing some great stuff now in pushing nutrition into a different space that it probably hasn't been before. So just firstly, Dunne, so as listed at the start, you've worked with a huge range, an extensive list of teams, players, organisations, which is very highly impressive, especially from an early age. Talk a little bit about some key learning experiences you've had along the way, certain organisations that grabbed you and maybe gave you some learning tools for the future. Don't have to mention them all. Probably best if you don't, because it might overrun. But yeah, anything that grabbed you from early age, and just summarise your career from a learning perspective, if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate enough to be exposed to quite a wide variety of sports, which has been fantastic for my development, because you get put out of your comfort zone. You know, I remember, one of my early jobs was in fencing. Like, I'd never even seen fencing before sort of day one and sort of rocking into that. So I think for me personally, some of the most valuable learning experiences I've had has actually just been on the back of being exposed to that volume of environments, and something I'd encourage every young practitioner or every practitioner generally to do. Because I think when you see what the different demands and different contexts are of different sport, it does challenge, like we said before, that the ability to think critically and actually, understand the different people, the different cultures, those different contexts. So I think, certainly exposure has led to a lot of learning and a lot of rapid learning on the spot. I think if I was to handpick one organization where I'd say I probably learned the most, probably was at British Canoeing. Again, like going back, we had a very good team there that I suppose we supported and challenged each other. So I think because we expected a lot of each other, it held us all accountable, and we were also able to help each other sort of solve those relevant performance problems. And I was probably, because we had a smaller group of athletes where we could get into a larger amount of detail, we had more complexity than sort of a traditional sort of UK domestic season where there was blocks of international travel, different environments. I think that was all fascinating for me, because before I'd gone in there, I'd never thought about, well, actually what happens, how do we adjust nutrition if someone is traveling through 8 different time zones? If somebody's on a flight for 9 hours, what do we need to do to take into consideration there? They're just scenarios that I never thought of now. And that kind of sort of opened my eyes a little bit to actually there is more to this. Then I think as I got probably in around 2015, I got quite interested that on the back of getting exposed to quite a number of places, you start to realize that there's similar problems just dressed up differently. A lot of what we're trying to do is help people get the basics in place. The basics are 85% of this. Some instances they could even be 90% for some athletes. Some instances that might be all the athlete needs, and they might just be talented enough. So I think back in 2015, then when we started to see these sort of patterns emerge, I got particularly interested in how we could be more effective at delivering. So I think I was spread quite thin then. I was kind of a day or 2 days a week in a few places, probably more that could fit into a 7-day period at that moment in time. And I think that learning experience was challenging, because you are spinning a lot of plates. And when you're spinning a lot of plates and you're essentially overstretched, you do look at ways that can improve efficiency. And there was a lot of energy leaks to a certain extent in service provision. There was a lot of stuff that potentially could be automated, that potentially could be made more scalable or more continuous, that just weren't. And that was also a bit of an eye opener for me, that, you know, my time is most impactful when I'm having a conversation with somebody, getting into the nitty gritty, building a relationship, you know, actually there, being present as a person and sort of, you know, being on the journey with that person, or really helping them in detail. And a lot of my time was still spent behind a laptop, trying to pull together resources, trying to, you know, get systems in place, trying to, you know, produce a certain amount of content that needed to go out to certain people. And, you know, that was time that I could have spent, you know, going for lunch with that person and, you know, hearing a little bit more about what was actually going on to deliver a better intervention. So I think that was another big learning curve, I suppose, then as well, was trying to make our roles more efficient and start to understand that there was an opportunity, but at that stage probably didn't know what the opportunity was. I was just frustrated.
Sure. And I'm sure we're going to come on to the opportunity and where that's led in a minute. On the flip side of that, Dunny, because I'm always a big advocate as well, sports scientists and early practitioners, of just taking as many opportunities as you can from a learning perspective, and also financially. You, as a nutritionist, you're going into as a consultant or as a part-time employer 1 day a week. Obviously, the more gigs you have, the more financially beneficial it is. But on the flip side, if you stretch yourself too much, is there a balance there around, especially when you get to the point where you are earning? Is there a balance where the service you can give to, let's say, 5 different organizations in a week, is that not as beneficial as, let's say, 3? I know these are arbitrary numbers, but is there a balance on how many gigs you take?
Of course, it's and it's not isolated in nutrition. I mean, I could be an accountant and I could be working for 10 firms, and then all of a sudden I you know, now I work for 25. Yeah. Like, there's only so many hours in the week. So yeah, I think people can definitely overstretch. I think the frustrating thing in sport, especially for an early practitioner, is you know, the intern system and everything else is just like, it just abuses people. So people almost get to that stage where they're fighting to get a contract, so that when they do get one, they feel like they need to hang on to everything else, because it is such a competitive landscape. There's so many people. I think there's like 14,000 graduates every year in sports science that might go down a sports science and nutrition, a strength and conditioning route. And, you know, there's not that many jobs. So I think part of that is born out of the fact that, you know, when you come out of university, to a certain extent, you're just expected to work for free, which I don't think is fair or reasonable. It's not something that I believe in. I think people should be, if people want those placement opportunities, that should occur throughout their university program to better enhance them as a practitioner, so they're ready to deliver when they're qualified. That's something that I did, and I think that was massively beneficial to me. Was I really tried to shoehorn all my free work into my 3-year undergraduate degree, or when I'm doing my postgraduate. But I think, you can't spread yourself too thin, but there is this mentality of, like, if you get a job, you've got to hang on to it. Yeah. Very few people in sport will go, you know what, I'm all right, I don't need that one. And if they are in that situation, you know, fair play to them, but it's certainly not common.
Sure. I haven't turned the job down yet, so I'm in the same situation. Different things. Do you think it's down to the individual though, Dunny? So, like, yeah, I agree, the system of coming out of your postgrad and having to do a year for free is ludicrous. But do you think that individual needs to be more proactive during the undergraduate years, second year, start taking on internships, getting hands-on experience? So when you do come out of your postgrad, you've got 3 years and you're warranted a salary. as opposed to nothing to offer.
Yeah, I think it has to be realistic. So I think like the student should demonstrate that they have gained some experience, whether that's during a camp, during a part of a season. You know, it's unrealistic to say that students in full-time education and they're also going to now work full-time with this organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there should be pockets of, you know, somewhere between 8 to 16 weeks made available for students to do placements, to maybe, you know, each year. And, you know, first year, they're probably not ready. It might be more of an observational kind of role. You know, their second and third years of their degree, they could go in and do some more applied stuff, hands-on, maybe in a lower down organization where the risks are lower. You know, maybe they have their own network of people where, you know, they play for a, you know, I don't know, a National 2 rugby team. And that would be a great starting point for somebody to go in and get their hands dirty and have that, like I said before, somebody there as a bit of a mentor or supervisor. I just think, you know, if we're going to create these opportunities, that there should be a little bit of a mentorship program available for those people at university.
Yeah.
But I do think, like, you look at some of the job specs that come out now and you see some of even the sports science role, it's like, you know, PhD, 3 years of applied experience, you know, 25K, and you go, like, it's a race to the bottom. So I also think it's on clubs just to actually think about why they want a person before they start to advertise those roles. Because, you know, do they want somebody to, you know, for nutrition, do they want a nutritionist because they think they should have someone and now they have somebody to fill shakers and clean water bottles? Or do they want someone because they're actually trying to go and change the culture at the club, you know, improve the physical performance of those individuals or even their health, or reduce the amount of time lost for players to illness and injury during the year? So I think the responsibility is on the sort of the clubs and PDs as well to have a better understanding of what they want that person to do, and then start to think, okay, financially, what is this worth to us? Because it's like the landscape at the minute is ludicrous. And certainly what I'm seeing amongst my peers is, I feel like it's becoming more and more of a, I don't want to say young person, but I'm going to use the analogy, sort of young person's game, where, yeah, everyone comes in and rinses themselves for 10 years. And then after 10 years, you go, you know what? I'm going to get a job in industry. This isn't worth the hassle. I need to, you know, if I've got a family and kids and I'm now in Russia and it's Sunday, 9 p.m. and I'm doing this, like it becomes a little bit unsustainable as well. So I think it's tough at the minute, I think.
Some great points there, Danny. I totally agree with you with the clubs. I think the organisations and clubs that are doing it the right way for the right reasons, I think you start to see the emerging people they've got in the department, but also some work that's coming out of it. So I think it is clear to see that those that are doing it the right way are, and there are some out there doing it, are evident. Okay, Danny, moving on to a little bit more present day, because I want to talk quite a bit about this. Currently a part-time PhD student with Liverpool John Moores, as mentioned, and you're co-founder of Hexis. And I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to hand it over to the expert. Talk to me about those two things, how they coincide, and basically what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. Like I said, back in 2015, I got pretty frustrated with the some of the inefficiencies that we had. So I decided to self-fund a PhD. And back then, I didn't really know what I was looking at. I started off, you know, exploring digital platforms and how we could make ourselves a little bit more scalable. So we kind of spoke to a few people in the field. I remember chatting to a nutritionist, a guy called Daniel Davey, you know, way back when, and he was kind of saying, you know, actually I'm now set up a few Facebook groups and things are going pretty well. So we said, okay, we'll give this a go and see what happens. And you could start to see that, you know, you could be in, I don't know, Spain at a canoe race or a canoe regatta, and you could still be interacting with the footballers that are back in the club and scheduling or delivering information that could be relevant to them at that moment in time, or at least they'd engage with. And it sort of pointed towards that, you know, well, one, online communication was certainly here to stay at that point. You know, I think that was sort of the earlier days of, you know, WhatsApp had been emerging. Facebook was maybe still, you know, just about 10 years old, potentially. You had some previous social media platforms that had, you know, were starting to creep in as well, and some that had drifted away. So I think this shift towards online behavior and this more global adoption of smartphones kind of shone the light to there is a way to drive engagement around nutrition and potentially a way to deliver interventions more scalably. So again, I sort of spent the first couple of years of my PhD, I'm going to say reading, observing, I'd like to say. I didn't do a lot of reading at the start. It took me a while to get up and running. I was a late bloomer in the PhD side of things. But we've eventually gone down this route now where we very much focus on nutrition, behavior change, and technology. And that's led to the creation of a platform called Hexis. So what we found from practitioners is that, we're not trained to deliver behavioral interventions. We don't get that, I suppose, education at university. It doesn't form part of that curriculum. But ultimately what we're trying to do is deliver dietary interventions to change an athlete's behavior, to improve their health, their training adaptations, their performance. Right now, we're currently delivering education-based interventions, which we know athletes struggle to adhere to. And so really what we wanted to do at Hexis was to go deep into behavioral science and start to look at a problem. And the problem we really focused on was fueling. Are athletes fueling at the right time? So are they periodizing their intake according to the demands of their training? Are they fueling so that they can actually, prime themselves for peak performance? They can actually operate at those high intensities. And if it is a big session, we don't want nutrition to be a limiting factor in an under delivery. But likewise, there might be certain times of the week relevant to their goal that they might need to taper down. So we got in contact with a guy called Sam Impey. Dr. Sam Impey did his PhD in this area of carbohydrate periodization and fueling for the work required. And we also had a team from UCL and from Duke NUS in Singapore, where we just sort of sat down and really looked to piece together a solution. And that solution right now is Hexis. And what we've built is a predictive, personalized, and periodized nutrition app for athletes that allows nutritionists to be more effective with their time. So you don't need to waste time sitting behind a laptop, manually putting together a meal plan, trying to troll the internet for recipes to stick a recipe beside each of the options that you've put into their periodized week. We've now built an algorithm that will ingest the type, the intensity, and the duration of your activity, look at how many opportunities there are to fuel for as well as recover from that activity, and produce a periodized plan in line with that individual's goal, and then tag that with a series of associated recipes from a database of, at the minute, I think we're up at about 1,500, tailored to energy requirements, carbohydrate requirements, and protein requirements of that athletes. So we've tried to make the recipes as accessible as possible. Like, there's nothing worse than, you've seen it in the applied setting. You give an athlete a recipe that has 400 ingredients and they just look at you like what do you expect me to do? One, I'm not going to buy this. And even if I did buy it, it says it takes 2 hours. So even when we're putting together these resources, we've spent a good bit of time trying to curate recipes that are, okay, what do I have at home? I've got oats, I've got peanut butter, some honey, some nuts, some seeds. Okay, cool. Let's make a no-bake flapjack bar, start to finish, 4 minutes. Snacks done for the week, perfect before, if it's the GAA guys, before they go out for that evening pitch session on a, let's say it's a Tuesday or Thursday or the bigger sessions, or a Monday or a Wednesday, depending on when they're playing that week. So that's really what we've done. So our aim is very much to, well, I suppose from a personal level, it's probably solving a pain that I suffered, which was, we waste a lot of time that could be spent with people, coaching people, building relationships, getting into the finer details of performance. And we waste that time doing, manual meal plans, pulling together recipes. So we hope that the solution allows, to a certain extent, allows nutritionists to sort of unlock their own potential, and actually be able to, when they do go into a sports organization now, not have to worry about that element, but actually get into the finer details of how they can bring that club or that individual to the next level.
Sounds fascinating stuff, and we're desperately waiting to use it here at QPR. I know we missed the study period, but no, we're really looking forward to getting the lads involved in that. So just to be clear, Danny, for the listeners, it's AI, yes, it's all machine based. So there's all the algorithms are set, and once the information gets put in from an individual, then the relevant content is populated to that person, right?
Yeah. So in terms of inputs, I mean, we've built an expert system. Which would be what you'd say is the AI system that will ingest when in a day that individual is training, when in relation to their meal pattern. It will look at the type and the intensity of that individual session. So it's predictive. So it's going to be subjective in advance. I know I'm going into, let's say it's a Tuesday night, it's going to be a, high intensity pitch session. I can rank it as that. And now we can predictively, personalize that individual's fueling requirements, so it is periodized throughout the week. So we will look to ingest that information, and then I suppose in a matter of seconds produce that periodized plan. So hopefully we're helping athletes with their planning behaviors have an easier to access solution in terms of, we use a visual traffic light system stemming from Sam Impey's research. The sort of low, medium, and high, or red, amber, and green sort of carbohydrate requirements and energy requirements. That's really what we're looking to tailor. It's like we said before, we're looking to keep protein pretty consistent in the background. And then, one of the hardest things in nutrition is, for most people, is actually converting it into food. Like, that's great, but like, put it on a plate, like make it something that's quick and easy and I can do in 10 minutes, because otherwise game over. So that's why we invested a huge amount of time and resource into building that recipe database. So I know myself and a few other practitioners have been working hard on that. We've actually got a girl back in Longford at the minute. I think she's an intercounty GAA player herself, so she knows what she's looking for from a performance perspective too, and she's helping us out build some great content there too.
Perfect. And I'm sure you've done all the studies on it and the thorough testing, but how robust is this system? Like, in terms of the info that's going in, are you confident that it will just churn out like perfect results within context of that app?
Yeah, I think it's like anything. You've just got to look at it as an iterative process. You look at something like, and I'm not saying we're anything like this at all, but you look at something like, the first Macintosh that came out, it wasn't what a MacBook is now, but it's sort of a step in the right direction. So I think we've got the first step in the right direction, which is that, in particular for intermittent field sports, I'm pretty confident about everything. I think there is stuff, and we've got internal projects that we're always looking to improve. Ultimately, we're trying to solve a pain for practitioners. So, if there's something that's painful to them, we want to hear about it. We've got a team of people that are just dedicated now to solving it. Because I've been on the other side where you're just suffering, you don't have enough time, you need to pull these things together, and it's limiting your ability to actually deliver your services to that organization. So we've dedicated ourselves to helping those people, and we want to build a bit of a community around it. We want people to not be afraid to come forward with those things, tell us more of what they want. We'll help build a solution.
Sounds perfect. No, it seems like you're starting to really build a viable solution for a lot of practitioners. So the solution side and logistics is one thing. Obviously, the emergence of technology, and you see now the modern player, the modern athletes always on their phone. It's the way of life. Even us, I'm sure. How important is that going forward, and how important is that technology is embedded into these resources, not just nutritionally, but maybe a lot of other ones as well, going into the future from a learning perspective? And also, is there a worry that it can be replaced from the conversation and that one-to-one interaction you do get with a practitioner?
So I think it's impossible to ignore technology at the minute. I think that, like, the stats are in the UK, I think it's 97% of 16 to 57-year-olds own a smartphone and check it on average every 12 minutes. So, like, there's been this pretty ubiquitous uptake that, trying to say, okay, we'll ignore this is just naive. We've now been afforded an opportunity to make ourselves more scalable. I don't think it'll ever replace us, because the human interaction is too important. We are social beings. We like conversation. we like building relationships, and we like meaningful relationships. You know, if I'm an athlete, I like knowing that the person I'm working with cares about me, not that it's a robot, because now I know that they're willing to go on this journey to help me deliver what I need to deliver. Likewise, from a practitioner, like I like going on those journeys. Like that's why you do what you do. You know, there's dark times, there's great times, but it's you know, it's that process which is enjoyable. So I firmly believe we're going into this era of hybrid coaching, really, which is where I think practitioners are just going to become even better at what they do, because computers are just going to afford us more time on certain tasks. So certain tasks, like I've said, you know, individually producing periodized meal plans and then tailoring recipe requirements. That takes time. That takes time for one person. If you've got a squad of 60, that's your full week gone. But that is something we can teach a computer to do. That could be a rules-based system. That can be, like we said before, that's an AI expert system. But the ability to understand what's going on in an individual's life, understand how I'm now going to tweak or fine tune everything around their performance, around the restrictions, because how far they have to travel to training, what supplements they may be taking, what's happening at home, you know, their halftime strategies. That, like, practitioner can come in and really help deliver that. But now you might have time to deliver that to the full squad, whereas before you may have had time to deliver that to 5 or 10 people, because every time you speak to this person, you've got to go away and produce the plan for it. So I think we're entering into an era of hybrid coaching where, yeah, computers will do what they're good at, and practitioners are going to just become a lot better at what they're getting paid to do in the first place.
So it's important to note that it's not just a computer-based approach that's there to enhance the service that the nutritionist is giving, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's, you know, I think, again, you can look at different people's autonomy. Some people may like a more computer-based approach and a lighter touch from a nutritionist. Some people might like a bit more hand-holding from the nutritionist. And this is something that I'm exploring, and that our team are exploring with our research now. You know, what is the intensity of nutrition coaching that is delivered? Should that actually be personalized and periodized? And can you profile for that? So we know everyone's different, but, you know, how different are we? You know, maybe I'm one of these people that I like to be spoken to every week. I like someone checking in. Maybe that accountability is important. Or maybe I could be one of those people that if somebody's always asking me every week, I just go, this person's wrecking my head. Don't worry, I'm looking after it. So I think it's important to at least consider that. As a practitioner now, we are personalization for me. I'm hoping this will be the title of my next paper for the PhD, but personalization for me is just moving beyond grams per kilo. It is no longer about, you know, based on this body weight, based on this size, based on, you know, your sport, this is how much food you need. It will become about how you deliver that intervention, via what modes, at what intensity, for how long, by whom. That's where I think we're going, you know, and technology has afforded us that, and it might scare some people. And like anything, I think we're going to get early adopters, but I think, you know, that's the way we're going. We've learned so much about designing interventions for the muscle. We forgot about the mind. And if the whole point of what we're trying to do is to shift or change an athlete's behavior, well then how can we optimize that? How do we actually influence that? Because we know now education isn't enough. There's enough research now to show that education in and of itself, even at an elite level, yes, it can improve someone's knowledge, but that knowledge doesn't translate into a change in behavior. You know, and on the flip side, you know, somebody might not know what to do, but because of the way something was structured, a message was delivered, or an environment was set up, they now might make the right choice. So it's interesting. I find this space fascinating. I don't think we'll ever know enough. I think we'll always start to learn more. These things are going to evolve over time. To a certain extent, we've just got to stay quite agnostic as to the approaches we take, because we're just going to go through this rapid phase of change anyway, and in what our service provision looks like and the tools that are afforded us.
Cheers, Danny. Thank you very much. Talking about behaviour change, which is a big one of yours, and like you said, your team are looking at quite thoroughly. Do you think in general nutritionists lack a little bit of knowledge around the psychology of maybe why people are making these choices? And too often you tell the player or the athlete that, yeah, you shouldn't be doing this, but actually there's deep rooted reasons to why they are doing that, and going back to type and maybe doing behaviours that aren't seen as ideal for their performance or health. Do you think there's something that could be done with there, better educational around that area?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're not psychologists, we're not trained psychologists, and it's important to recognize that. I do think we'd benefit from behavior change training. You do look at, what is available in the literature that just is currently siloed from sports nutrition, and it's just about making its way into sports nutrition. We're now seeing people referring to theories or theoretical constructs and bringing in things like the behavior change wheel or the COM-B model, which will exist in that other field. But even then, we're seeing people bring these in, and we're not seeing them deliver interventions. We're just seeing them capture barriers and enablers in relation to those behaviors. For us to learn, we need people to design, develop, and deliver theory and evidence-based behavioral interventions to improve our understanding of what is and isn't working for different types of people. And we need to look at better study designs to capture this. An RCT it's not a gold standard anymore. We have to look at adaptive design, things like, I suppose, smart design interventions, where people could, let's say I'm trying to get from A to B. I could go from A to B via A1, A12, A13 to B. That could be the route I take. You could take A2 to whatever. So there's different paths and to get there. Whereas at the minute, we look at traditional study design and sports science. One, studies are really poorly powered. We think we get 20 people and we think that's great. When it comes to changing, it's not good enough. I know there are limitations, but we need to collaborate as a field, maybe. Start to join up and stop looking at, our own labs or teams in isolation. If we want to carry out some of this meaningful research, and I think we need to look to other fields who might have some of the solutions that we're looking for. But because we exist in this echo chamber, we're leaving a wealth of knowledge siloed. What answers do computer science have? What can we learn from behavioral science? What do we not know about, interaction or interaction design, even design? Like, you look at all these different platforms that have all of these different features that manage to hook us and bring us back and change our behavior. Sometimes we're just trying to get somebody to drink a bit more water. There's definitely stuff that we can learn. I just think for me, a multidisciplinary approach isn't the nutritionist speaks to the S&C, speaks to the coach, speaks to the physio. It's got to go beyond that now. It's got to go within that sporting environment. What other areas of expertise can we bring in? What can a sports team learn from a startup, from a well-established business? All of those different elements are, it's just my opinion, and I'm more than happy for people to say you're wrong. And that's completely, everyone has their opinion. I think in the last few years, since I've kind of stepped out of the nutrition space and kind of seen what's going on in other spaces, it's made me think, like, we just are scratching the surface. And until we actually take a step back, appreciate everything else that's out there, and just start to understand our limitations, like how many limitations we have, and that the answers might not exist within our field of expertise, then I think we could be stuck. But if we can, then great. I just think we're just gonna go on this new journey.
Yeah, Danny, I totally agree with you. And I think your critical thought process comes out all the time, which is something that I always resonate with. Just sticking within the psychology theme, because I want to it might be a sensitive subject, maybe not, but just around like eating disorders, something that I was personally involved with when I was younger. And I've had experience of players going through this. Like the nutritionist for me is so powerful in, I wouldn't say triggering these, but I think it's sensitive in how you relay information to certain individuals. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Are you equipped enough to go into a consultation with someone who might be prone to be this extreme and take certain things overboard? Or is that something that is a learning process? Or again, do we need to learn from outside of the discipline?
I think the most important thing here is that anything clinical, if you're a nutritionist, you're not qualified to deal with it. So if somebody came to me with an eating disorder, I would refer to a trusted dietitian that has the relevant clinical expertise to handle that situation. So if you're a nutritionist and not a dietitian, you should not be managing those situations. You should be referring them on to a dietitian with relevant expertise within that area to be managed clinically. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, yeah, that's probably the biggest point on this. Can nutritionists set off these based on how they deliver information? Sure, they can. You know, some athletes are incredibly vulnerable. A lot of people will hear what they want to hear. In particular, if they have a certain thought process or belief system, it could add to that. It could add to that echo chamber that already exists. And you look at things like social media, like Instagram, the way they're set up is that you are going to believe normality to be what you're perceiving on your feed, even though what you're perceiving on your feed has been curated for you based on your likes and your interests. So now your likes and your interests appear more normal than what they actually are. So I think it's not just nutritionists. I think the way technology is set up can further feed into this. And I know there's been some research on this as well, looking at some disordered eating. But yeah, nutritionists have to be very careful in how they deliver information. And I think as well, it's important to recognize, probably one of the most important things I think is to recognize and understand in enough detail who you're speaking to and what the risk factors are. Mm-hmm. You know, the risk factor for speaking to a senior men's football team is very different to an under 15 female team. Mm-hmm. Messages do have to be tailored and portrayed in a certain way, not to add fuel to the fire per se, but to provide the relevant support and guidance that those people need at that moment in time. And again, so a good example would be, you know, a good friend of mine has done some great research in underage football, you know, looking at the energy requirements of youth football athletes. And Marcus Hannon, you know, came up with some great research that sort of highlighted the volume of energy these youth athletes need. So you don't want somebody that's going to come in and say, oh, actually, you need to really reduce your intake here. You need a low energy meal at this moment in time. You know, that's going to cause confusion and skew the message and potentially lead to negative outcomes. So yeah, nutritionists can add fuel to the fire. They need to be very aware of what they are doing, and yeah, be very careful in how they plan to deliver to that particular audience at that moment in time. But if there is ever any issues, it's clinical. It's got to be referred and handled in an appropriate manner.
Cheers, Danny. The reason why I brought that up, well, twofold really. I think that there's still maybe some misbelief around that these disordered eating habits or eating disorders actually occur especially in senior male clubs and football and Gaelic and whatever. And also, I think you're right. I don't think it's just the nutritionist that has the onus on this. I think with food, it's obviously the speciality in your area. But I think coaches, sports scientists need to have an awareness of certain individuals and, like you say, how vulnerable they are, for sure. All right, Danny, just before we jump on to the last question, just moving around the Hexis app, it might be hard for you to answer this one, but for the normal general population, when would this app be available, or the service or resource be able to purchase or acquire for their teams?
Sure. Yeah, we're getting close, which is great. First of all, for teams or organizations, we're actually we have organizations that want to find out more. Do let us know. There's over 1,000 athletes on the platform from a variety of male and female squads, and yeah, we're seeing some really interesting stuff. Definitely helping a lot of athletes fuel smarter, which is awesome. So teams or organizations can get in contact now, and we have the solution ready for them. For, I suppose, the recreational athlete or the serious enthusiast who's looking to get that secret sauce or that cutting edge, I would say it'll be sometime in the first half of next year. I'm hoping in the first quarter we should have it sort of live and up available to activate a membership with us.
And where's the best place to get hold of you, Danny, or someone of the team?
Yeah, so for people that want to get hold of me, I suppose the best one is David at hexisapp.com if you want to find out more. I get back to a lot of messages there each day, where they can sign up to find out more on the website, hexisapp.com as well. For people that want to find out a bit more about me, they can get me on Twitter or Instagram, which is just at the Nutritionizer. Basically nutritionists, just spelt with a T. One of my first gigs at Harlequins, they managed to spell that title wrong on the card and all the stuff I was given, so it managed to stick with me since then.
Brilliant. I never knew that story. That's great. Perfect. Well, Danny, I'm sure everyone will be, well, I'm sure you get flooded with different messages, to be honest. So, but hopefully long term that helps you out. Thank you so much for your time today. I just want to finish off with an everlasting thought from you, I guess, for coaches and sports scientists and nutritionists coming out of university. So first one for me, Danny, of this two-part question, what advice would you give to sports coaches or sports scientists who don't have any nutritional support in terms of a nutritionist or online platform service? What's your best advice to those in terms of providing some sort of service to their squads or athletes?
Probably the main thing is kind of stay in your lane. So look for expertise. Build your own network of people. You don't need a full-time nutritionist to deliver some form of nutrition service. But yeah, you should look to find somebody in your network that you trust, that is qualified, that can sort of help guide you in providing that sort of basic level of guidance. You know, and if they want to reach out to us at Hexis, we have all of that ready and good to go. So by all means, they can get in contact with us, and I'm sure we can help out.
Perfect. And the second part was to actual nutritionists coming out, which we covered a little bit into the industry. What's your advice to those that are emerging as practitioners, or maybe starting to be educated to become a practitioner?
Probably twofold. The first thing would be get your unpaid work out of the way at university, like we said. Definitely, it's going to save you time, hassle, and money in the long run. And try to get a mentor or a small network of people that you can bounce ideas off and learn. So we are a friendly bunch and an inclusive bunch. So I think what you'll find is, you know, if we can help, we will help. So I think it's important to have that sounding board as you start to go. So try find somebody that you might be able to get a little bit of advice off, even if it is one phone call every couple of months, just to check you're on the right tracks.
Perfect. Danny, your stuff has been gold, invaluable. I'm sure listeners will love it. Thank you very much for coming on and taking the time today. We really appreciate it.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me.
No problem. This is the Locker Room Podcast. You just listened to episode 29 with David Dunne. A little word from myself, Kieran and Joe about upcoming stuff or stuff that's on the website now. Please head over to the website, www.dailysportscience.com, and you'll see a whole range of services we can provide on there for different membership options. Thank you once again, and look forward to seeing you soon.
The Locker Room Podcast is brought to you by dailysportscience.com, an online elite coaching and sports science service, membership service. You can search all the information and services over at dailysportscience.com. You see everything over there. I'm here with Ross and Joe. Lads, there's loads of stuff going on at the moment. Ross, we'll run through really quick. Ross, you've got a really interesting off-season coaches CPD series, video series for the members.
Yeah, really good, kid. So 6-part presentation, 6-part presentation, 6 different topics that are kind of out there on social media and stuff. And I'm kind of, let's say, doing 3 to 4 of them, and you guys are taking the baton on that. So really good so far. We've had 2 released based on the individual training session and periodization. Recorded one recently around developing the individual player. We've got one around the physical corner, and then you guys are taking over the tactical side and also the environment and culture. So really good opportunity, especially with things going on in Ireland at the minute, to learn and keep sharing information. So really enjoyed that, really good feedback, and they'll be released throughout the next 6 weeks.
Great stuff. Joe, there's loads of Gaelic football and hurling practices gone up as well.
Yeah, there is, Kieran. Every week there are Gaelic practices going up, and I know that Ross talked about. I think I'm doing CPD session 4, which is how to set up a team tactically. So I'm putting up some kickouts there, for instance, and some defensive structures that coaches can kind of get used to in the off season and plan to bring in maybe next season. So yeah, lots of stuff there coming up on the website in terms of practices. Good
stuff. We've got an off season GA program as well, in terms of gym program and fitness and running program as well, designed by Ben Smalley, our sports scientist as well, and overlooked by Ross as well, head of performance. So that's really good for all members. So they're all exclusive members. The last 2 things to mention then is the Locker Room webinar series, which is closed for exclusive for our DSS members. So that's every second Monday night. We bring on an expert to do a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation through Zoom. Everyone can dial in live and then ask some questions as well. It's been really popular, and it's a brilliant new initiative. We're always coming up with these new initiatives. The last thing then to mention is the Buddy Referral Scheme. So that's where a member can send a referral to their friend. The friend will get 25% off the sign-up fee, and then the member will get access to one of the GA positional profile videos. So Ross, we did them over the last few weeks. I think there's some good content there.
Class content. I think it's a great initiative. Instead of just, normally the person who refers someone doesn't get anything, and the new member gets whatever the offer is. But this stuff is gold dust, in my opinion. You get info on what each positional essential is and what you're looking for each player and how to coach it. So it gives you real good information on developing the individual players in your team.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, for members, it's less than 15 quid a month. Ross, that's less than a Ross Bennett haircut once a month to cut back those golden locks.
And less than, I think the book I wrote 4 years ago still hasn't creeped up to 15 quid. So you're getting so much for that, for sure. Yeah, and I only get a haircut once a year, Keir, so £15 a year is not bad, I don't think.
Yeah, the girls in the house here, Ross, they just said, what is the point in Ross Bennett if he doesn't have long, flowing blonde hair? They get disappointed when it's cut.
I know, it's coming back. It's coming back.
So yeah, the book, so for the price of Ross Bennett's book, which you should all go out and buy, I've forgotten the name of it now at the moment.
But I can tell you, kids, injury prevention and rehabilitation. Now, he never knew I was going to plug that on here, but I need sales. Christmas is coming up. I need some sales.
Christmas is coming. I've got 2 copies of them here, Ross, so we can sell that off secondhand to Joe. He might be able to use it.
You need them for the doorstop in those heavy doors of yours.
Yeah, exactly. Joe, I was just about to say that you'd need a few quid for the online dating, but those days are over for you.
Yeah, I think they are, Kieran. Hopefully.
Good to hear it.
He tried to keep it quiet, but those weekends in the New Forest, we knew you wasn't going on your own, Joe.
Exactly. It was dodgy. It was dodgy. 15 quid, Joe, per month, not much.
Yeah, 15 quid a month. Yeah, I've had a look at I think 4 or 5 of the positions, and I've never ever seen as much detail in terms of the different positions in football, in Gaelic football, broken down into so much detail. So there's lots of, as Ross said, it's gold dust. There's lots of great learning points there for coaches and managers.
Great, good stuff. Okay, enjoy the rest of the episode, everybody. The podcast, remember, dailysportscience.com, and head over. We've actually started a new offer for listeners to the podcast. So just use POD20 as a voucher code to sign up membership, and you get 20% off as well. So for any new members out there or relapse members, just use POD20 and you get 20% off membership. A good time, as the lads say, Ross was saying, with all the new CPD and everything. So a good time to join up. Okay, enjoy.